Well, hello and welcome to Dockside Magic, where we talk about flavor and functionality in the competitive Commander format. I'm your host, Isaac, accompanied by my brother, Aaron, and accompanied by Kevin. Kevin Eric Simmons just got married. That is a lot of the reason why we have a huge delay in our podcast that we've been doing. No, guilty as charged. I moved. He got married. It's how it goes.
I have no excuses.
Cue the applause button. When do we get one of those?
Nice. Gentlemen, what have we been brewing up? Have you guys been tuning any decks, making some big changes, creating new decks? What do you got on the current radar right now, Kevin?
Yeah. Well, like you were just saying, definitely getting married took quite a bit of time. That's mainly been what's on the radar for the most part. It was awesome having both of you guys at the wedding, but in terms of like cEDH, Magic and whatnot, I've kind of been on a bit of a spree, to be honest. Really was inspired by the
killing spree.
Yeah, I was inspired heavily by seeing Magda take down major tournament going 7-0, and I was like, if she can, I can, and so I just made a bunch of trash can decks.
Dude, can you imagine going 7-0 at a tournament in mono red? Can you imagine that feeling? Just like, I'm all that is man.
Chaos 7-0.
What else have you been brewing up?
Cool.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty sick. Actually, you can find Coibito. He's in quite a bit of interviews with other popular, podcasts for in terms of cEDH. The guy's super cool. I think like his overall response just seemed kind of surprised. That's probably how I would have felt. Like, wait, I win?
Nice.
But yeah,
I'll share a little bit about what I've been doing a bunch of research on. So, being the green player that I am and combining it with pretty much anything is the best thing, right? But being a Simic player for so long, kind of branching out away from that, a couple ideas in mind, right? So branching away from just a Simic pairing, I'm trying to always familiarize myself with like other cards that are in the meta, other colors, push myself not only to learn that so I can adopt that playstyle for myself, but also learn how to play against it. I've really delved further into the Aristocrat, the Treasure Storm, definitely looking further into like black-red pairings, black-red-green pairings, and I've been looking a lot at Corvold. Corvold is super fun. I don't feel like it's super linearly played. I do feel like there are several recognized lists with Corvold that can be super linear and are basically like I tutor the same one or two cards, like the food chain list. It's pretty simple. It's like all.
It's either you're doing dockside things or you're doing food chain things.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot more flavor that comes from like the Treasure Storm portion of that. The treasure allows you to play into a couple other lines and provide pieces that are never dead. There's always value in every piece that you have, regardless of whether you have your combo pairing on the field or access to it or not. There are always things that you can be doing, and you're always kind of like amassing this wealth, if you will. Treasure. Anyway. Nice. You propose some kind of a constant threat, a constant aggro, and as we've definitely determined, like I like dictating somewhat of the pace of play of a game by being an aggro player and kind of setting the tone and the pace. And with those color pairings, like it's just mad chaos, and you're never like fully out. Even the fact that Corvold has flying and you can put +1/+1 counters on him when he's sacrificing stuff, like yes, he's an incredible draw engine, but the fact that you can just literally one shot somebody who's a problem with probably an unblocked attacker and hit him for 21 commander damage and KO him, like all of it is just fun. There's just so many lines and so many things you can go with that I've really enjoyed the hours of research that I've put into it so far.
That does seem really cool. And I've actually always enjoyed watching Corvold decks go off. Mm-hmm. Most specifically the Treasure Storm, archetype more so than Food Chain, because it's just more exciting. Mm-hmm. You never know if it's just going to fizzle out But a lot of actions are going to be taken. The only thing that's ever turned me off from Corvold, reason I've never played it myself or piloted it, and mind you, I've been proven wrong on this a numerous amount of occasions separately. But the whole idea of finally getting Corvold out, he's a bigger commander at 5 CMC, having to sacrifice a permanent on ETB, and then someone just removing your commander. You're then essentially left with, say you kept a greedy hand, especially involving like a Jeweled Lotus. It's just so very much so in my mind's eye, at least, feels like you're just kind of out of the game, without like such a powerful engine of a commander. Like if he's kind of taken out once, you're just out of the game for 2 to 3 turn cycles, because without the draw engine online, all the permanents, and like I said, I've lost games because of that thought process.
Sure. Let me just share my thoughts with that. So you are absolutely correct. And builds that basically you have to have Corvold out on the field to be able to, win or present is involved in some portion of your like loop. Yes, he does make it easy. Yes, he's a powerhouse. But when you can, I'm trying to like engineer a build that I do not have to have him out on the field at all to do that. In fact, playing him means like whatever interaction or whatever removal you do have is going to be straight taking care of Corvold, which allows me then to play my actual combo piece. So it's more of like a smoke screen, because it is such a value engine piece, and not have to have that out in the field at all to be able to present my win line. And with the Treasure Storm possibility, like it's great because I do make a ton of treasures. How many, like even playing Kinnan, how many times is this like, okay, I play Kinnan and it gets killed, and I literally just play Kinnan again. Hardcast, for 4 or for 6, paying the tax.
I mean,
it doesn't
yes,
matter.
But like Corvold's what? 2 green, red, black.
He is 5 CMC, 3 colorless.
Yeah.
Or no,
kind of has he has the Elsha problem. It's the Elsha problem, I call it.
But like once you play that and then you have to replay it, that's 7. That's a little different than Kinnan for 2 and then Kinnan for 2 more commander attacks.
It is, but I'll also say this, like. Let's say that I do play Corvold and I have, say, 4 treasures on the field. Someone is like, okay, like you just played Corvold. I'm going to, whatever, hit Corvold for whatever removal spell or kill or whatever it might be. I can sack those treasures for 4 mana, float 4 mana, and also draw 4 cards in response to that. Like,
right.
It's just
that is quite a lot.
Yeah, it's been fun. Like I said, there's different ways to build it. There's the aristocrat with like the blood artist with the Zulapart cutthroat. There is treasure. There's food chain. There's all these different avenues, and there are all those different avenues that are super fun because he's just broken, and the colors that he's in are just broken, and paired together, it's just super
At some point, we do have to get to our topic, but last question on the Corvold topic. Witherbloom Apprentice, Chain of Smog.
It's very tutorable within those colors, for sure. I think that if I was going to go for that win line, I would have to lean, like, more heavily towards that win line and protecting that win line, and I feel like that would take too many of the fun cards out, but that would be like a great plan B, and I'm not sure if that provides like enough like value pieces standalone for it to be worth my time.
I've never personally been a huge fan of the combo, but more times often than not when I see it put together, it's not stopped, because it'll either A, catch someone off guard, people never seem to expect it, or B, I one time saw a Corvold list. They were doing their whole Corvold treasure storm turn type of thing. They had already gotten their Chain of Smog countered after discarding their entire hand, and after cracking a few treasures, just like top decked an Ewit. So they just Eternal Witnessed it right back to hand, and it was like, oh, that's nice. Good. That's very good.
It can be spicy. It's definitely like an all-in type of combo, and I don't know. I avoid combos like that are just like
Sure.
I don't know. It's tutorable for sure, and it's definitely respected. But I feel like as far as overall value plays within those colors, it doesn't fall on the stronger side of it.
No, the area where it fails is that yes, it's tutorable, but you're never going to want to use your tutor for those.
Mm-mm.
Like you're not going to want to stack 2 tutors to get those items.
No.
There's a lot of other things that are massively higher value to actually tutor for. Jumping from that to the actual thing we came to talk about today.
Oh no, hold on. We gotta because actually both both Isaac and I actually found ourselves kind of brewing in the same corner without realizing it. Mind you, after he had moved, how's Denver, by the way?
It's awesome. Super happy. There's mountains. I like skiing and I like mountain biking. Those 2 things are a lot better in Colorado than they are in Ohio.
How's the brewing in Colorado?
A little bit more back than prior.
So you guys found yourselves brewing the same. What now?
We both made a Hulk list at the same time without really realizing it. He built a Timna Thrasios Hulk list.
Mm-hmm.
With more of like the Rector stuff, Arena and Academy. And I built a Tevesh Thrasios Hulk list, in which I use Thrasios like Rograk to draw 3 cards, and use Tevesh as the sack outlet for Hulk. Still have a lot of fine tuning to do with that deck. Really only play tested it a couple times, or goldfished it a few times, I should say, and played it a few times. So I think I've got a lot of room to understand when and how and at what phase on end step during just regular turn to do the Hulk piles, what stuff I want in the piles, do I want to tailor each pile a little bit differently. I've been playing obviously a lot of Kenrith that you guys have played with me against, and I found after playing that for so long and just jamming that deck alone, I realized how much I actually leaned into white in that deck, which I don't currently have in Tevesh Thrasios, and I'm finding myself really missing like the Grand Abolisher. It'd be really nice to have Grand Abolisher in some of the piles that I'm going for when I actually sack a Protein Hulk. But I've had a lot of fun challenges with that deck. It's in colors that I enjoy. I've been trying to get better at green. It's probably one of my weakest colors. I'm pretty weak at red, pretty weak at green, and I'm pretty weak at white. I think I've got the room to grow in that deck. There's a lot of changes I can make, a lot of sculpting still to come, and those things are really fun. There's some clunky parts that can get smoothed out, and that process is enjoyable.
So wait, just to clarify, does this mean that you're only good when playing blue and black?
Actually, you can withhold blue. I'm not good at blue either. I'm all right at black.
Man, that's awesome.
Black is simple. You just have all the tutors in the game, and you tutor for your pieces. So
you pay life, you get your stuff, you assemble it, you pay more life, and then you win the game.
What's not to love? It's easy as fuck.
Hulk is I thought it was awesome that we kind of both landed at the same assumption, even with you moving halfway, or all the way across the country. Essentially, like I was saying earlier, I just got really inspired by the Magda list. I put a version together on my own, play testing some of the games for just a few weeks really heavily, and found that it was just so invaluable to have a combo that is versatile and highly difficult to interact with. Unless you have really the curse totem effects, which no one's playing because everyone's on cursed, everyone's on creatures as of right now. But then also, like tutor hate is the only thing that really crushes that. And because there's just so many tutors, no matter what color you're playing, unless mono red, which is kind of ironic mentioning Magda. But
I mean, Hulk has a archetype that kind of falls to the same thing that like Yeson falls to. It's like Oppo just devours it. Like it's just Oppo wreaks havoc to those decks.
Yeah, I don't know. So I mean, even then, I after the Magda list, I actually was doing some work on a really older brew of mine, Naru Meha. I was trying to explore more so instant speed wins, leaning into mid-range, grinding out as much value as I possibly could. And that's how I landed on my version that I've been putting together, which is, TNT, Tymna, and Thrasios. And I'm actually utilizing a version of that using the Rectors, both Arena and Academy Rector, as I'm on a Jace line as my fallback. And then, obviously the Pattern of Rebirth. It's been extremely fun with 2 powerhouse value engines to where it feels like I'm pretty much getting the best of all of it. So,
right. I guess this is honestly a fairly decent point to segue into the topic we came to talk about today. Because I feel like you and I we haven't actually talked about this yet, but what is the reason that you found yourself wanting to, outside of the aforementioned having your combo be something that's hard to interact with, what specific in the meta, which is what we're talking about, is where the meta is, what is meta, how does meta ebbs and flow. But why did you find yourself wanting to go Hulk to kind of be a counter to the meta or to actually fit in properly to the meta?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So as far as meta in cEDH, I think this is something that you could probably have 100 episodes, 100 different podcasts on, because I believe it's very, very vast for a couple of different reasons. Like you can hear many different content creators and podcasts will all share cEDH as an overall game mode is still very much so in its beginning stages, right? I mean, back in the day, it was literally just Xur and Bryant's Pile of Broken. That's pretty much what you get. That's what you had for cEDH. There's only a few lists, and that's why you got the stigma of cEDH being a pub stomp game type. Oh, this guy just likes to jam wins turn 1 or turn 2. When in reality, I think an overall grand meta is very much so ambiguous. It's difficult to really hone in on because I think it's different everywhere you go. So what I wanted to do is try to find something that has the fewest weaknesses overall in this kind of game of rock, paper, scissors that we have going between, in one of our previous episodes, we were talking a lot about play styles and archetypes of the adaptive, proactive, reactive, type of stuff. But I don't know, Aaron, how would you define meta overall? I'd probably say you're probably the most competitive gamer of us, or if not the most experienced.
Well, that's an interesting title to take on, but I'll humbly roll with that. So meta is hard to describe, but I feel like if I was going to take a stab at it, I would say that meta is take your elite playing members of said game, the agreed upon most efficient ways of doing X, Y, and Z in relation to it being cEDH and cEDH meta. Of course, I would say that it would be the most common shells, the most common and most efficient and recognized tried and true win lines. And from those you get certain colors. So say Demon Consult and Thassa's, you see a bunch of black and blue. And I feel like meta goes so much more than just kind of the surfacey stereotypes. It goes into what other cards are commonly recognized within those colors as being good, because you're going to see those show up, even to the point where I would say meta even reflects certain prices of different cards, because you're going to see certain cards show up over and over and over again in people's lists, because a lot of really good tried and true shells have black and blue in them. And it's just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of the way I view it, kind of the way I've always viewed it.
So since meta is kind of just this ever-changing thing that's, like I said before, the ebbs and flows and things that counter things, and then the meta changes, the this, the that. All right, it's 2020. What colors or what color pairing is meta? What strategy is super commonly seen?
In 2020?
Yeah, 2020.
Flash Hulk. Flash Hulk.
Okay, post Flash Hulk banner.
So unbelievably better than everything else available.
So,
yeah.
Post Flash Hulks. I feel like you
Hulk.
see a lot of Zur into Necropotence.
Yeah. So historically, actually, that was something really interesting. We were all kind of, well, I don't know about you guys, but I was just getting back into EDH after taking a little bit of break in college and stuff, and didn't really understand that cEDH was a defined meta separate from just overall play as competitively as you can Commander, right? So there was a little bit of a time gap for myself, I think, but from what I've heard, it seems like I've definitely heard people saying that, it took everyone a while to actually lean into ad nauseum as a strategy. So the meta didn't necessarily just flip to that, but it kind of opened up as there wasn't necessarily one major thing. Of course, Paradox Engine was around during that time as well. I never really got to exploit that in any brews, but I think that, and you also had a much smaller pool to pick from. We've gotten so many powerhouse commanders since 2020. Right. In all the commander-centric products that they've been releasing.
Whenever I hear the question meta and cEDH, I think of how defined the meta was in 2020. So Theros Beyond Death came out January 24th maybe. That set had Underworld Breach and Thassa's Oracle. So instantaneously, meta was super Grixis heavy. Demonic Consultation went from a 99-cent card to a $20 card. Brain Freeze became extremely relevant in multiple facets. And that's where Adnaz instantaneously picked up, got a huge boost. 2020, I feel like everybody was running Grixis-esque colors, Adnaz like crazy. And then this is where I really felt like I started to learn what a meta looked like and how it changed, because that got so heavy, and for a solid 16 months, Adnaz was in every single game. Did you ever sit down at a table where blue-black wasn't represented by at least 3 out of 4 players? No. It's every single play was, they might have Adnaz mana. Anybody at any point in time that was playing black when they were going around in turn order, if they had 5 mana potentially available, people could have had a little bit of mana and maybe enough if they had a dark ritual, then they would have had their 5 black or whatever. It's they have Adnaz mana. Constantly we were pointing the finger Adnaz mana. They got Adnaz mana. 2020 was such an extreme meta of one very defined archetype that it quickly shifted to maybe 2021, and then Stacks was super heavy. It's as a fairly instant counter to the storminess that comes with Adnaz. I'm newer to cEDH. 2020 is a lot of where I started actually doing more creative things in cEDH and started learning more about it and researching more. And that's where I really feel like I started to learn what the meta was, because I saw a meta change happen. And that's the creature-based stacks, deafening silences, your collector oofs, your null rods. Your so many different rule of laws, just to prevent people from casting Adnaz and then dumping 30 cards onto the field. Adnaz, mocks this, mocks that, freaking all these, Simian Spirit Guides paired up with just little creature, every spell continuous. And it was well, we can stop Adnaz and how powerful it is by playing Rule of Law. And then meta was Rule of Law. And then people started attacking more, and it caused this meta switch. Was that a similar experience for you guys?
I would say watching the evolution of cEDH kind of unfold, and even the solidification of the definition of cEDH over the last few years has been quite interesting to follow. And also just looking back and intentionally documenting the changes and shifts in meta has been super interesting to follow. I definitely agree with what you said, Isaac. And I think it's just, I'll make kind of a side point here and say that it's really, I just find it interesting to see how meta changes. So you definitely can think you see a new set come out, you see a card that just looks absolutely busted, and you're like, oh my goodness, like this and this and this is going to work well with this. This is going to change meta. But new cards do change meta, but there are several different things that go into a meta changing. New cards being put into the card pool, whether it be one card that is busted, or now like a card that might not be as efficient now has more pairings with newer cards that could be more efficient, and ways that you can shut down common win strategies, or you can control common win strategies, can shape decks that can formulate the meta and shift it slightly.
Yeah, there were some big card like prints and even just reprints that like helped slow down the massive influx of Adnos. Like Curse Totem getting reprinted in Modern Horizons 2, like really like Curse Totem was just more commonly put in people's hands. Not that it was an expensive card before, it just was at a price where people are like, I don't know if I want to pay that for that card. Not
it felt new and shiny.
Yeah, but when it became $1 card and everybody just started putting it in their decks, and they're like, wow, this messes on a lot of people's creatures. You know, like this hurts a lot of things. Like another card that was like a pretty big meta buster was like Endurance, I think was a pretty decent one. Like that hit a lot of things that a lot of people were trying to do.
Yeah, I think specifically Endurance is probably a better example than Curse Totem. Just in that Curse Totem doesn't necessarily save you from the Turbo Nas.
No, that was the Curse Totem was more of like the creature based stuff that was happening after Nas.
Yeah. But I think that like the overall idea of meta shift, I wouldn't call that even just a meta shift. Really, I'd say that was a full blown meta swing, right?
Right.
Because the way that I define meta, and this kind of leans into that a little bit, is I almost to a degree see a Nash equilibrium of rock, paper, scissors, right? Where you from the very get-go of the format, when people were playing competitively, to lean back on the whole proactive, adaptive, and reactive game styles. I kind of see rock, paper, scissors in that, you know, each one is a little bit of a counterpick to the next, right? So say you've got a farm deck or a turbo deck, you know, that's your scissors. Say you've got a rock that could crush a scissors, that's your stacks deck. Those are the rule of laws, because man, what a crippling effect to have on the board. And if you're a greedy turbo player, you don't have enchantment removal, so you're just stuck on this fair magic game, and you'll be dead before you can figure out a solution, essentially, if it were one-on-one at least. And then of course you have the latter, the third one, you know, being that kind of like mid-range type of list that can outvalue over a course of time if the game is to be played at a fair pace, but then also might not necessarily be the best poised against a turbo deck that's just going to come underneath it, and while you're tapping out on turn 2 for your Ristic study, feeling great about yourself, you just die. Right? So seeing that like full meta swing that you were just referring to kind of brought up a really good point and made me realize that cEDH as an overall game really does have a lot of commonalities with like your classic meta, right? Like I think the most impactful meta topic is, what do people think is good, right? Because being a 4-player pod, that's going to carry so much more weight than which deck is actually the most efficient.
I definitely want to use that segue to kind of reiterate a point that was already made, but I think it's worth bringing up again to kind of emphasize, and that is, it has been interesting to watch how meta has not changed, but shifted to what cards are getting reprinted, or at least the exact same card that's just being called something else. It's the same tools that have been accessible for forever, or at least a while, but the community as a whole is very hot, very up on what is new, what's hot, what's current. And you have to think that there are other formats of this game that are being played. So when people make the investment of some cards that say that they might use for a separate format that they can also use for EDH, all of that plays into it. And because of that, there are shifts that happen that make macroscopic like ripples into the play format. And it does feel like when a new set comes out, even if there aren't like super powerhouse cards, that they're just reprints, it does feel like I start seeing the same thing over and over and over again. And the reality of it is there's a lot of people in this format that just look at some of the titans of this industry, so to speak, and just copy paste what they're doing. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, but it does create for some very vanilla stuff where I can look at somebody's like commander and I'm like, I could probably say easily 97 out of the 98 cards that you have in your deck.
Right. Like kind of an example of what I think you're saying here. Like when Kawagama came out, Yuriko was a card that had already been out. It got reprinted, and Yuriko was in every single game I played for like 2 months. And then I started seeing Adnaz like a ton again. I started seeing Peer into the Abyss again, like a lot. And it's just a reprint of a card, and it caused like this slight quick shift in the meta. You know, like,
well.
I'm not just calling you out here, Kevin. I'm just blasting you.
Well, actually, 2 people in our friends pod actually built a Yuriko list. One of them, he was like just getting into cEDH. The other one was me because I like shiny things, and
they're the same person.
To be fair, they did print a Ninja Malcolm, which sounded really sexy. But yeah, I think it's certainly true. Like most cEDH players are kind of like that to a degree, at least in that new printings come out. They don't even need to be like your Cursed Totem example. They don't need to be new cards.
Right.
Just new printings just kind of gain your attention on those.
Spice things up for people. Like one thing I noticed is like the Adnaz was crazy. And then it caused a lot of this rule of law stuff to happen. And I saw like heavy stacks. And then from the heavy stacks, it's like, well, it's hard to play through stacks. So I saw a ton of mid-range start to happen. Like TNT got really high up again. Like TNT has always been redeemed as one of the best decks. But like for a little bit there when Adnaz was massively popular, didn't see it a lot. And it came back because it could play through rule of law. So then you started having these other decks that could play through rule of law. I found myself wanting to adapt to the meta. I built a Kenrith deck. It did a really good job of playing through the rule of law. Like I even at a point in time had rule of law in the deck, but it was like a meta call to try and get something that could play around it. Then all these mid-range decks started coming up again, and like another swing changed where like people started playing faster based stuff, or actually people even also started doing more creature attacking in that mid-range kind of area. Like there was all these different little shifts that kept on happening.
Right. I want to talk about Kevin's like rock, paper, scissors analogy that kind of was basically describing balance, if I could use that for a second, Kev. When I see new cards coming out, it's a great opportunity to take a look at what is possibly going to be coming, what shells are going to be super popular, and it gives you as the engineer the opportunity to say, okay, this is what I anticipate is going to be coming. This is what people are talking about already. I can either choose one of a couple different things. I can choose to create something that is absolutely going to shut down common like topics that are already being discussed. I can build something that is going to be balanced and will be well matched and a good match for that and make an enjoyable game for everybody. Or I can try to make the most efficient list of what people are already talking about and try to throw in some of my own flavor. And those are some of like the very common approaches. And I think that some people also take that into mind and consideration when they're going to tournaments. Like the fun aspect of it, yes, can be there for the more casual thing, but that option is more or less off the field. Like I said, you've got a couple different ways of approaching it, and most of the time in the cEDH community, you are trying to anticipate what is going to be at the table, and you are a step ahead if you can anticipate what spicy stuff is going to be there and figure out how you're going to shut that down and manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. That and a prime example of that are kind of like the mono white guys, right?
Never heard of them.
So yeah, for those that aren't familiar with the mono white guys, there's pretty much Charles Levine and Dr. Oh gosh, what's his? I'm sorry, I'm spacing. But anyway, these guys bring these mono white stacks decks to major tournaments like Marchesa, Tier 1 Con, and they're playing stuff like Heliod as their commander. And I'm not even talking about the Heliod that combos with Walking Ballista. because there's an argument where like, hey, that's a pretty good though, it catches people off guard. No, like OG Vigilance beat your face in Heliod, literally top forward the tournament that the one that Magda won, and that's just because like the piloting was to such a high degree where every hand he kept had some highly impactful stacks pieces to shut people down, etc., and just kind of like managed that exact meta perfectly.
That's brilliant. I mean, I think that's such a great expression of not only your engineering, your flavor of play, but also creating like everybody at the table is going to play this pace of game, and it's all going to be pretty fair Magic.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is like, and this is a little bit of a hot take, but as far as I can see with the whole like rock paper scissors thing, I think we are actually kind of getting to the point where mid range is like your most decks are more often than not, if they're going to be the most competitive, probably want some level of mid range, right? And my theory behind that is like you have some play against the turbo, you have some play against the heavy stacks. You're right there kind of in the middle. And as cards increase in power level, the predictability, being able to call out play patterns, for instance, in my current TNT list, is much more difficult if I'm on the other side of the playing mat, if you will, as opposed to something like a more traditional mid-range list, say Yuriko. Yuriko, every single game, I guarantee you, they're dropping a dork or a little evasive creature turn 1, turn 2 ninjutsu Yuriko, turn 3 maybe another dork, maybe another, and it's just like a slow, grindy like value train that they're doing. Whereas with TNT, you just never know if this is the game that, I Gemstone Caverns, Lotus Petal, land for turn, Thassa's Console. Not to say that's not a possibility, but I see people play TNT like that often. So with such powerful value engines as a backup, or I think this is why so many people think that Blue Farm is kind of like the quote unquote best.
It's one of the best decks, yeah.
Yeah. But
the Blue Farm conversation is valid because Blue Farm, even though it's typically on turbo-y ad nos things, it's still in the white to have your silence, your stacks, that if you want to. There's a lot of draw potential in the deck. Obviously, the commanders are extremely draw-centric, Crom and Timna. And there's a ton of wheel pieces that the deck plays. But the deck is very, very, very adaptable. Like TNT is also in the similar realm. It's very, very adaptable. Mm-hmm. And it can play in a lot of environments. Like they both can still do a lot of good things in a lot of the pods that you'll actually find out there, regardless of meta. Now, there's definitely a lot of meta busters that could cause pretty large, failures in those two decks that were mentioned. But for the most part, those are just like consistent decks. Like if you're looking for a meta deck that is just going to put up decent numbers, that's probably going to be fairly close to that 25% win rate with a quasi decent pilot. Like pretty much look no further than Timna Crom or Timna Thrasios. Like they're just really consistent decks that are in the correct colors. I mean, obviously they're both 4-color decks. That's a lot of colors nonetheless. But you're basically just choosing all the good stuff of your color. Like there's a lot of like bland value pieces that really honestly stack all together very well to sculpt a very meticulous, powerful, consistent deck.
Yeah, and what I would argue to piggyback on that, an overall meta statement is just that Timna plus, right. Like Timna being such an amazing, incredible like value engine that you pay once for, and then you're drawing up to 3 cards for free every turn thereafter is just unbelievable. And it just gets better the more opponents that you have that are doing the same game plan.
Right. Like the Timna plus strategy really plays at a lot of speeds. Like it can really play at a very fast speed, and it can also, most of the Timna plus decks can also play a mid-range or long game well. And that, I think that's where those decks do so well, regardless of where the meta is at. Like right now, I think the meta is still fairly damn mid-rangey and kind of almost going back a little bit to that turbo side. It's getting a little bit faster again. We're starting to see less of the rule of law. People started realizing that whether it be just their deck or their piloting skills, that they weren't able to win through their rule laws well enough and started kind of moving on from a little bit. It still exists a ton, but not like it did a year and a half ago. Like it's these little shifts that are just kind of continual. Like I said, I've literally built a Kenrith deck to counter what the meta was doing, to be able to work around the meta and kind of break the parity on what the meta was doing.
So let me throw out this little bit of theory here. So most of the mid-range decks that I see are usually partner pairings. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, usually.
Usually.
Or oddly monocolored decks.
Yeah, no, but I guess that kind of plays in the same kind of theory to a degree. To be able to get into mid-range, you either have this like you have like this slow roll where you're either amassing resources to a critical point, or you are trying to play just like value pieces where you basically have your board state be I outvalue everybody unchecked and will then again reach that critical mass point. I think that part of the reason why we see mid-range so much in today's meta is because you're seeing 2 to 3 color pairings, usually through partner pairings. And in those pairings, let's say there's 4 colors, you have just the straightest, juiciest, gassiest stuff that you can drop in there. So you can think, say, like Thrasios and Tymna. You got black, white, you got green, and you got blue, right? Think of the cards that are automatic includes, so to speak. You know, obviously that term is debatable, but automatic includes for those colors. You know what I mean? You just have all of these power cards that are so powerful that you're looking to play as soon as you can. Like you're looking at, okay, maybe I got like a fish in my hand. Maybe I got a Ristic Study. Maybe I've got a, Bob. Maybe I've got a, what's the 2 black shadow guy that we are always
Dothy Voidwalker.
Yes, the Dothy Voidwalker. You have all these cards that are just so valuable that you're taking your first several turns to just almost like formulate these little pawn pieces in this chess match, so to speak, and then basically say, this is my line of defense, this is my value engines. If anything goes unchecked, you are able to then out-resource and outplay your opponents.
I think you mentioned Mystic Remora in your opening hand, and it made me think of like meta calls based on like how you mulligan.
What turn
I've been
order is
finding myself a ton in the past like year for say, like getting a Mystic Remora in a hand that's like a decent hand, but like actually pitching it and grabbing another, like taking my mulligan, or even like waiting till turn 2 or 3 more often to actually play my Mystic Remora, because there's just like I'm going to get no value off this turn 1 when everybody drops a dork. And then I'm now behind because I'm paying the tax to try and get the value out of something that I put out that I was depending on. So I find myself, all right, now I'm playing it turn 2. Sometimes I find the turn 3 is even better. It's like, well, now holding on to a hand that has a Mystic Remora on it, like brought me to this conundrum of like, shit, sometimes those hands just aren't good enough anymore. I'm pitching them, which is like 2020 peak Adnaz. Mystic Remora was absolutely gas. It's like, keep that turn 1 every single time.
Yeah, it's some of that boils down to like your own strategy and, like I said, turn order and stuff too. But those are all very valid arguments. But the overall theory of like your deck just being stacked with super ridiculously high value pieces that you put it out, it's a problem. It goes unchecked. You have this certain line of defense that allows you to outvalue and then mid-range a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually just while we're hyping up mid-range so much, I kind of want to like pivot a little bit and just talk about the meta overall. As I came up with this as my own labeling, so share live feedback here. I haven't even gone over it with you guys, but I kind of just define the meta overall at large right now as a creature-heavy meta. And what I mean by that is, largely, probably most significantly, it's defined by Tymna Plus. That's kind of how it always has been, right? Insert the astronaut meme. Like even when the ad nauseum was just so homogenizing, everyone was just on the Grixis ad nauseum stuff. They're Grixis plus Tymna, right? And that's hence where the farm decks kind of came into play. And now the best mid-range decks seem to be a lot of Tymna. Even some of the best stacks decks, Tymna Kamal has been making a lot of waves. But actually, speaking of Tymna Kamal and the more infamous Winota, as I think some of the most potent, fast killing via combat damage stacks decks. What are your guys' thoughts on whether or not the creature meta is kind of where we are, or do you think, kind of like Isaac was hinting earlier, that we're hinting a little bit closer back towards like a Grixis Storm meta?
No, I think we're for sure in a pretty heavy creature meta. I think there's tinges and hints of the Stormy ad nauseam stuff coming back, but for the most part, I think we're still in a pretty heavy creature meta. Like, for example, in a lot of my decks, I've taken out maybe a couple pet cards that weren't necessarily good meta cards at the time and put in March of Swirling Mists because of the creature meta that's happening right now, to be able to get rid of like certain pieces. Like, I play Malcolm. How impactful Malcolm has made me realize the power of a March of Swirling Mist, per se. Like, to be able to get rid of like Dothies to like force somebody to sack it type of thing. Like Winota, honestly, that's another good example. Like, the cards are really, really impactful creatures that can really throw the game in a spiral. So I've found myself making a lot of picks and a lot of card changes in my lineups just based on that right now. It's like, oh wow, like your Esper Sentinel's pretty good, but honestly your what's the new one? The bird. It's a one in a blue. Just came out. It convened or
Ledger Shredder.
Yeah, Ledger Shredder is like
connives.
It's one mana more. Yeah, combines. It's kind of a little bit better right now. It's able to hit people. It has flying. Like, a lot of those kind of cards are starting to like get implemented more. Like, I'm actually sometimes worried about when I pass my Gilded Drake to somebody to take a creature. It's like, damn, how hard are they going to start hitting me with a Gilded Drake? I'm not even on any Adnos decks right now. It's like we're in a really creature beats heavy meta too. Like, it's oddly more beats than I ever thought it would get, and I'm actually enjoying that a lot. It's a very comfortable and fun change.
That's the thing about where a meta kind of like plateaus with newly released cards. I feel like there's kind of this shift because the game is balanced. It goes back and forth. You'll see like, the entrance of like Adnaz, and then you'll start seeing, more of like the stacks, or maybe even into more of like the creature heavy based stuff because it's harder to counter or whatever, harder to interact with. And then eventually you'll start to see a balance that comes back to, we'll eventually come back, and we've made hints to this. It's starting to come back to the Adnaz and PETA like days. In the off season, so to speak, where there aren't a bunch of new cards that are heavily changing the meta, I think that there is kind of like this balance switch that goes back and forth. I think that we are in a heavy creature kind of meta at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, to Isaac's point, kind of reminds me of a game that we had just not too long ago, where we were all able to get together and like play a game over Spell Table, and like we were all playing pretty quality, Magic. Each one of us trying to go for our wins when we saw a window, getting stuffed or getting stopped by other players, just playing well, responsibly, etc. It kind of turned into this overall like, well, crap, combat damage so quickly has gotten so extremely relevant. And I remember even like Isaac got to the point where like you had the perfect sculpted 7 in hand, and like your own Gilded Drake from earlier in the game was actually what closed it out. And right. I remember walking away from that thinking like, wow, I never would have actually planned for this, yet this is like where we ended.
Right, and, like had like an opening 7 where I never thought I would lose, like that good,
Right. That's kind of like where I think, as people are playing more responsibly, I think a lot more games like that are kind of to be had. I know personally, at least for myself, like the type of cEDH and Magic that I really enjoy are just games where you have like some really high quality stack interaction, or at least plays that are not necessarily easy to foresee. Like, oh my gosh, I really would not have guessed that this guy.
Is going to play a Noxious Revival and put a land on top of your library or something.
Yeah, or even Boseiju. It's just like, dude, like cards like that just kind of deflecting SWAT is another really big one for me.
Speaking of just cards that are really cool in the meta, because it's so creature based, and granted, I apologize to you guys as the pod I primarily play with. I've been playing this card a bunch lately. But something that the card came out, and I was like, yeah, it's a pretty good card, and it's all out of play. And then I've always liked
Culling Ritual.
Culling Ritual. Dude, Culling Ritual is a card that I didn't see for a little while there, and God Almighty, that card's good.
I cannot agree with you enough there. I put Culling Ritual. Actually, I started playing that card back when Cody had just won Tier 1 Con, and I took it to the local meta tournament local tournament, whatever, that you and I both went to. Actually, I think, Isaac, did you win that tournament?
I mean, I'm not sure if that's the one you're referring to or not. At a point in time, yeah, something. There was one of those I did. Yeah,
I played it at that tournament, and I got to play the card 3 times over the course, and each and every time you see Culling Ritual, I feel like at face value, window value, mannequin value, however you want to describe this, what you see on the card is a board wipe. When in reality, what you get from it is, not necessarily a board wipe in that it probably isn't going to get rid of your every issue that's on the board. For example, Ranger Captain of Eos, still there, still got to work it.
But it's certainly your really high level threats. It just takes out all these little small value engines. It's not like the big ticket item cards that it ever hits. It hits all the little small value engines that seriously, severely cripple somebody's overall game plan.
Absolutely. And what I was kind of getting at there is the ritual part of the card is freaking nuts.
The ritual part's so good.
I believe my record is making 28 mana off of one Culling Ritual. That's just obnoxious. All the whilst, getting rid of cards that I needed gone anyway.
But, it's impressively good.
That's an interesting point, though. Because that's a card that I think both you and I are extraordinarily high on at the moment. Yeah. To the point probably where even if it isn't best in slot, I'm probably still playing it. And I would even determine that as a meta call, if you will.
Right.
That's kind of what I was going to get at. If we're able to define the meta overall as a creature meta, what are some ways that you guys see to take advantage of that?
So a while ago, I built. Sorry, I'm drawing your blank. My Kenrith deck. Kenrith has been. This is almost cliche to say, extremely resilient deck. It can do so many different things, but the life gain aspect of Kenrith is really good. For when I'm getting swung at, I can pay a couple mana and gain 5 life. That's oddly very, very relevant. Additionally, Kenrith can go into beats. He can do both. So he can gain me life and he can go into beats. That's a pretty good card that is able to do a little, parity breaking on the meta right now. As a commander, I have some bias in saying this. I love Kenrith. It's probably my favorite deck I've built, but it's just not ever been bad since it got printed. Even during the heavy Adnaz realm, it was still a really good deck. What was it? Throne of Eldraine was end of 2019, somewhere in that time frame. And continually since then, that's been a hot ticket commander. It's not always been the most popular one because it's not the most exciting. You're not going to rip a Peer into the Abyss and play 40 cards that you drew. That's just not what the deck is doing. But it just does a lot of things very well. A bunch of little tiny micro things. That was a meta pick I chose, or at least as a commander.
It appeals to a pretty big audience as well. I mean, you see someone slap out a Kenrith, you have no idea if it's tribal casual, some weird jank list, or super high power cEDH.
Yeah, you get that with 5 color decks. It could be Slivers Kenrith. Who knows?
I think it's funny that you mentioned the life gain ability on Kenrith too, because I think for the weirdest reason, I am the most salty when you're gaining life with Kenrith's ability, and it's just God, oh man, that's good. That's kind of the whole idea behind the Ikra Bruce farm, right?
Yeah.
But King Kenny is definitely no joke.
With Kenrith, I probably use his life gain ability more often than I use his reanimate ability. The only thing I think I use more is draw, and it's not by a lot. I mean, having a commander that's in 5 colors with a toolbox of 5 different abilities, like it's there's a reason why it's been considered a damn good deck for a long time.
No, yeah, I think that's really good stuff. I'll be honest, what I was expecting you guys to say was more so like play more board wipes, right?
Yeah,
because that seems to be the general consensus online, where you're talking to people and it's like, well, how many board wipes do you play, as opposed to like, say, casual commander, for instance, right? That's always a creature heavy meta. Casual commander typically wins through swinging out with, say, 500, not infinite, but 500 different 1/1 soldier tokens, right?
Yeah.
And that's by definition a creature meta. So they all play a lot of board wipes, which is strange because outside of really Deluge, and not even that as much anymore, really Psych Rift is the only thing that we ever see in our format. So
I see
that
Deluge more than I see Fire Covenant. I don't even see Psych Rifts that often. If we're talking board wipes that I see a lot, I couldn't name one that I see a lot. I see some every once in a while, but as literally every person has ever said, board wipes are catastrophically underplayed. Like, they're just not, for some reason, viewed as this hot ticket slot in your deck, where truly they are a hot ticket slot. And people are like, let me put a Mox Amber in instead. Like, let me accelerate my own game plan instead of decelerating others. And I think that's a point where I, at points, really need to reflect back on mine and build into more board wipes. It's also hard to play board wipes because it's kind of that same rule of law theory where sometimes people realize you just can't win through it. Like, you board wipe and now it wasn't asymmetrical, and now you can't play through the board wipe you just did. And it's like that same thing as like a wheel effect, where sometimes you wheeled at the wrong time and also kind of just help give somebody a win. Like, board wipes can also do that. So like, they're tricky to play. Anything that's not asymmetrical is also just has a higher IQ level to it, where it's a little bit challenging. I think Fiery Covenant, of all the ones mentioned outside of Cyclonic Rift, because that is asymmetrical, but Fiery Covenant you can pick and choose more, and that should be played more often. I think it's currently a good meta pick. That's why I picked March of Swirling Mist. Has been in a lot of decks I've been building lately, because I can pretty easily get rid of a couple key problems. Yes, they come back, but it's a blue spell, which is altogether just easier with X in it, and I can reduce that cost, and I can pay into that cost to remove more things, very asymmetrically speaking.
Dude, I love that you're bringing up March of Swirling Mist, because that was actually a card that I was really low on initially, and I was like, see, I'm not necessarily sure if it's worth it. Phasing is a cool mechanic and whatnot, but you are, at the end of the day, you are pitching a blue card, right? So that's disallowing other cards like Force of Will, Force of Negation, and the like to be online that much less often. Plus, it requires mana. Plus, it's just phasing of creatures, so it's not an eternal answer. It's just like it's truly just phasing. What I've seen is that card be unbelievably impactful. Or I think Aaron brought up another really good one in Dress Down. Yeah. Same exact results with that card. I mean, both just are complete slam dunks, I believe, in the current meta.
Yeah. I with March of Swirling Mist, when I first saw the card, I saw it in several decks and I was like, I'm not really sure why that's in there. And like, at surface level, I was looking at it as an advantage piece, not a disadvantage piece that when I played on somebody else, how it sets them back. I was looking at it to finite light on how it's going to help me in my game plan. And yes, it does do that. It can get rid of some stack piece that is locking me out of the game. But I can also use it and kind of take out somebody else's win line that they're currently using, or huge value engine that is setting them up for a win line. And at the also too, where I looked into the microscope of it and didn't see it for what it was at the beginning, is just kind of forgot it's instant speed. Like, Sometimes like when you're analyzing cards
yeah.
and you just read the text over and over and over again, and you're like, how is this really popular? Why is it being broken? How do I break it? How do I make it better? And I just kind of forget, like, I can do this at literally any time.
I think that's so true. Like, so many missed interactions with March of Swirling Mist specifically are, say, for instance, our buddy Aaron on his Kinnan list is going to go for, and I don't even know if you still play this line. I haven't seen it in a while, but say you go for a Freed from the Real on a Mana Dork, right? And as you do that, declaring targets, you can phase out your said Mana Dork. That's like just such a crazy interaction that you just never really see, and then you're freed from the real fizzles or whatnot. So many creature dependent combos are kind of like that. I'm a little bit curious. What do you guys think? Would it take for us to flip out of a creature meta like an instant speed Toxic Deluge, or do you think it would require more so like a shiny new object printing of, say, a Grixis shell?
I think it would be maybe the board wipe that is more asymmetrical, that's easier to understand, or say like the Curse Totem that's more asymmetrical. Curse Totem as it is already insane, but breaking your parity on it isn't currently the easiest thing to do. So I think sometimes we will want just stuff that's simple. We don't want stuff that's hard to do in our decks and it's complicated. So the simple play is the one we're going to opt for when slotting cards in our deck. And a lot of times wheels and board wipes sometimes can get actually hard to slot in there. They're not always just like an instant jam into the deck because there's a lot of timing restrictions that come with them. And not just that, when you actually are able to do them in your main phases, there's a lot of things that can come after them where you can potentially accidentally king make and kind of just hand over the game to somebody else. And I think that's some of where maybe they're not as popular right now. And then yet again, like they're not the shiny toy of fun.
Yeah, I think that board wipes are just too commonly feel like a dead card in your hand situationally. It's like exactly what you need. But I feel like most of the time when I'm looking at a board wipe in my hand, I'm thinking like, yeah, it's going to be a pitched card to Chromox or whatever,
right. Like
which is cool.
But if you have a board wipe turn 1, I'm like, ooh, like I don't want this at all. Turn 2, turn 3, I sometimes don't even want it. I really only want it in the mid-range or extremely late game. Even the late game, it's just really hard to get them to go off. So they're almost a mid-range card. So I think that's where
you've heard of win more cards. Are you suggesting that board wipes are dead more cards?
Dead more cards. I don't know. I mean, I'm not.
I think too that some of the colors that you see board wipe cards in, you're either looking for super non-creature, super fast decks like Adnos, or the colors that you see them in are decks that are also running creature strategies, and it seems a little counterintuitive. But I could actually argue that point. Like, if you're running a creature-based deck in a creature-heavy meta, like I think it's actually pretty important to still run mass creature removal, especially if you've designed it to like be able to recoup from that kind of strategy quicker than your opponents. You can outvalue that people that way and still control the game.
Right.
So my personal take on that last point, I guess I'll make on the whole creature meta thing. Targeted removal. It's the only other answer really that we got here, right? Like personally, I've even started playing Slaughter Pact. Every red deck I've ever built, I've never taken out a Lightning Bolt. I think Lightning Bolt is so unbelievably good.
Good.
But yeah, I think targeted removal even, it kind of answers a little bit, not perfectly per se, but targeted removal never necessarily feels dead. Adds some layer of protection. Will give a mind this, like, it doesn't save you from the Thassa's Oracle, certainly, but most creature mid-range combos, it does seem to kind of at least hamper or hit the point right on the head. Even with like Kark Sakashima is a perfect example. You got to cast Sakashima and ETB target Kark, you bolt the Kark in response, and now they're stuck with 0 commanders, super far behind out of the game for a while, whilst still playing Izzet control. That's like the ideal situation. All that's just gained from a little bit of targeted removal, which I think everyone needs to play more of.
I think that targeted removal is super important and definitely underplayed, especially when you get comfortable inside of a certain meta. But what I think is really important to consider is, let's say, so playing Kinnan, like there's not a lot of great, it doesn't boast the best efficient removal, right? But what I have fallen in love with are bounce spells that let me take care of any problem on the board. It can be any non-land permanent. So I have to be able to bide my time, wait till it's the end of somebody's turn, and bounce their rule law or whatever creature or whatever stacks piece that's like a problem. But it also allows some versatility. Let's say like someone is targeting my Kinnan with, you know, some kind of a kill spell. Let's say I know that I can't pay the commander tax. I've already paid it a couple times or whatever. I can just bounce my own Kinnan spell, or I can bounce a permanent that allows me to draw a card in a pinch. Like, bounce spells are not the most efficient, but they are the most versatile. And there's that fine line of like, how many removal pieces do I run? How many bounce spells do I run? Some of that boils down to like personal choice, but it's a sticky thing that definitely has to be part of like your engineering process and like game plan.
You want to talk about two cards that are just absolute powerhouses of versatility when it comes to removal? Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast. Like, you can counter stuff and blow stuff up in the color that is most commonly played. Like, that is impressively decent. Like, you're able to hit blue stuff. That seems good. You're able to counter it or destroy it in red. Those are like those two cards make red extremely viable outside of just your Underworld or Dockside. I digress some here. We've definitely gone long in our conversation, but those ones just felt too good not to talk about.
There's nothing that feels better than Red Elemental blasting someone's Crom.
Yeah.
I say that just assuming it's never happened to me personally. I feel like I'm always the Crom that's getting blasted, but seems nice. Seems good.
No doubt. Well, I mean, in closing, obviously we've talked about a lot of different topics, but this is a meta conversation in the summer of 2022. For those that are listening to this, this is an ever-changing thing. I think that's obviously the point of the things we've talked about here. It's always going to be ebbs and flowing, and there's a lot of intricacies to what metagame is, and is truly what makes this game so fun. Because if there was just one deck that was truly what meta was, and it was the only thing worth playing because it was so good, the game wouldn't be fun really at all. It wouldn't have any flavor or nuanced differences to it. It would just be the same current thing that's happening. Yes, a lot of people make the argument that Thassa's Oracle causes the same thing over and over again, but my argument to that, to an extent where that meta is still fun, is because there's a trillion different ways to get to that. Thassa's is just the thing that actually reads you win the game. There's a billion different ways, per se, to actually get to that part of you win the game, and that's where there's so many different meta possible changes right now, and that part's really fun.
Mm-hmm. And actually, even to that point, I'm going to get you over a link for whenever this does go live. The folks over at Budget Brews have done a really nice job of accumulating all of the actual commanders that have been winning tournaments lately. So in terms of meta, just looking at some of the best performing lists and this, that, and the other, every single tournament seems to have a different, winner. It's absolutely insane. I mean, you've got Hulane, Oscar, Minsk and Boo, Evelyn, the new, Crom and Timna, Prosper. It goes on and on. I mean, I don't, even scrolling through this, I don't see two of the same. It's unbelievable. So, like, I don't know, some meat for thought, a pretty awesome resource that they've got put together that you can also check out.
Right.
Cool.
Aaron, you got anything else in closing?
No, I think that was some super solid stuff. Little game theory, little flavor, little personal preference. Definitely some thought-provoking ideas and thoughts, as there are some major tournaments coming up. Kind of fun stuff to mull over.
Right. Well, for those of you that are still listening in, I'm genuinely impressed. This has gone long, which is true standard style for us, even if we're just doing a deck tech. But we appreciate you listening in. if you feel inclined, liking and sharing helps videos grow, as we do want to make more content. And now that I have moved and Kevin is now officially married and past the figuring the wedding stages out, we're going to do more content ideally, which will be fun for all of us here.
Sounds good.
No doubt.
No doubt. Keep the classy, folks.